Hi everyone, my name is Lizzie and this is my supply chain final. I'm going to be interviewing my dad, Kim, who works for a pharmaceutical company, and we're going to talk to him about the supply chain in the pharmaceutical industry. So tell me about your current position and past companies you've worked for.
So I'm currently Senior Director of Process Chemistry at a company called BioAge, which is located in Richmond, California. This is a biotech startup, and the company's goal is to develop drugs that ameliorate the effects of aging. So drugs that treat muscle atrophy or drugs that make the immune response a little more strong, and drugs that treat neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and things like that. I've been in the pharmaceutical industry since 1992. I've worked in practically all therapeutic areas, including oncology, diabetes, antivirals, antibacterials, CNS, and now in this very unusual area. I was with Pfizer for quite some time as the head of process chemistry in Pfizer La Jolla, and I left that company in 2006 to essentially start my own company as a contract research organization. And that company lasted about 4 or 5 years. And then I went back to the pharmaceutical company in a series of startup biotechs, essentially hoping to hit another home run with a small startup company.
Awesome. So in your industry, how does supply chain work? Is it mostly international, domestic? Where are you sourcing the drugs, or does it depend on what the drug is?
No, so there are a large number of chemical manufacturing plants and facilities across the world which will make drugs. So our supply chains are international because we sell drugs to the international community. So the way the supply chain works is we place an order for a certain amount of a drug to be synthesized. And generally, these are multi-year contracts. It's not just a one-time thing in most cases. So we'll say to someone, we want 20 metric tons of a particular drug made per year, or the contract may be graded such that we can increase or decrease as we wish. And then these companies, they make what's called the active pharmaceutical ingredient. So that's actually the actual drug that has the therapeutic effect. Once the drug is made, it is transferred to another company which does the formulation of the drug. And what that means is they'll turn the active pharmaceutical ingredient into a capsule or a pill or an injectable or a lotion or whatever the delivery vehicle happens to be. From there, that's called bright stock, and the bright stock is then packaged and labeled, and labeling is a very carefully regulated uh, event regulated by the FDA. It's packaged and labeled, and then drug is sent to depots in each country. So these are like warehouses, very specially designed warehouses, and the depots house the drugs of maybe many different countries or companies. And then from there, they're brought to hospitals, by truck or by train or whatever, to hospitals, pharmacies, and other places where the drugs are sold or dispensed.
Cool. That kind of leads into my next question, which has there been any major supply chain issues besides COVID-19 that have majorly disrupted the pharmaceutical industry?
So there are fires that happen all the time at plants because we deal in very thermally hazardous types of process chemistry. So fires are fairly common, and that can shut down a facility for quite some time because then investigations have to be done and stuff like that. There are also strikes that occur very irregularly, and with that, and it's kind of hard to predict. So what that means is generally in the supply chain, at any of those points in the supply chain, either making the API, formulating the API, or packaging and labeling, that's almost always multi-sourced, so that you don't rely on a single location to supply any of the either supply material or to work on a material, because otherwise the supply chain it just falls apart. So the one very serious issue in our industry that I think everybody would probably cite is what happened with Abbott Pharmaceuticals back in the 1990s. So Abbott was making an HIV drug at the time that people had to take chronically, meaning they had to take for the rest every day for the rest of their lives. And the problem is that if you stop taking the drug, the virus, HIV, would develop resistance to that particular drug, and it would no longer be effective. So, due to a scientific problem, Abbott was unable to manufacture the drug at any of their facilities. And this was very big news, made the front page of the Los Angeles Times, and Abbott got a lot of bad press because people had to go off of their drug. And on there were other drugs they could take at the time, but undoubtedly the people who went off that drug developed resistance to it and could never take it again. That's kind of a rare event to occur for, for a supply chain to be interrupted for scientific reasons. It's more like we worry about natural events, floods, fires, and then things like strikes.
Interesting. So, tell me about your recent trip to India and why it's so important for the supply chain in the pharmaceutical industry for you guys to be vetting your manufacturers and who's, involved in the supply chain.
Yeah, so I went to India to oversee a 50-kilogram repurification of a drug that we're going to put into phase two clinical trials. Phase two clinical trials involve humans. And so so pharmaceuticals are a very carefully regulated industry. The FDA in the United States and other regulatory organizations across the world develop a series of rules and guidelines that you have to follow when doing any kind of an operation involving a drug that eventually goes into humans. So since we had never manufactured or worked with this particular contract development manufacturing organization before, we thought it would be prudent to send somebody there to actually take a look at their facilities, actually monitor one of the manufacturing runs, and just to see, the kind of people we were dealing with. So this is actually pretty common. So if a company like ours is going to make a drug somewhere, there has to be what's called a quality audit. So we would send somebody there that would inspect all of their quality systems. And in my case, I was there for a technical audit. The quality audit had already been performed, but the technical audit in this case was just to be sure, is this somebody who, who we trusted, that had good, clean facilities, that had good control over their processes. And it's just, I think it was just a smart thing to do.
Very cool. And then my last question for you is, how do pharmaceutical companies in general figure out what the consumer demand is for certain drugs, and does it vary often?
Yes. So for every drug that gets to a certain point of development, there's a commercial group within companies that evaluate what the demand is for what the demand could be for that particular drug. Commercial analyses start very early in the development cycle. So once a drug or a compound is nominated for development, the development of that drug may take 10 years. But all along, the commercial group is evaluating, how much of this do we think we're really going to sell? What does the competition look like? How much do we think we can sell it for? What do we think the adoption rate is going to be versus other drugs that treat the same disease? And then the commercial groups make a prediction, and then the manufacturing groups essentially take that prediction, usually add about 20% to it, and then start the supply chain rolling.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking to our class about supply chain in the pharmaceutical industry. I think we really learned a lot, so we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.